The judge laughed when he offered her a husband for free. 3 men stood before her, one in chains, head down. The widow pointed to him. Nobody knew why, but the choice would change everything. The sun was hot on her bonnet, but warmth wasn't what made her sweat. Not today. Joanna Bell stood straight in front of the raised platform, her hands folded so tightly her knuckles blanched white. Dust swirled in lazy rings behind the crowd, and the air reeked of horse, sweat, and scorched timber. But all she could feel was the weight of 100 eyes pressing into her back. Watching. Judging. She didn't flinch. 3 options, Mrs. Bell, the judge called out from beneath the canvas awning. Pick any husband for free. The townsfolk chuckled at that, more amused by the show than the stakes. It wasn't often the town of Marigold hosted a public husbandry draft, but this was something else. On the platform stood 3 men. The first, Jack Weller, had broad shoulders and a swagger that didn't belong to a man down on his luck. His shirt was rolled to the elbows, revealing forearms like tree trunks. He winked when Joanna's gaze passed over him. The second, David Riker, was clean-shaven, quick-smiled, and already half in love with himself. He gave her a shallow nod, the kind that belonged more to a poker table than a prayer meeting. "Ma'am," he said through a grin. The third man was different. He stood a pace behind the others, shackles around his wrists, chains clinking every time he shifted his weight. Unlike the other 2, he didn't smile, didn't wink, didn't speak. His head stayed bowed beneath the brim of a worn hat, and even the judge seemed unsure of how he'd ended up in the lineup. "Now don't mind the quiet one," the judge said with a nervous chuckle, tapping his gavel against the edge of the rail. "Came in last night, part of the chain gang passing through. Bit of a mix-up. Wasn't meant to be in this, but," he shrugged. "Well, Providence has a funny sense of humor." The crowd laughed again. Joanna didn't. She looked past the smirks and sunburns, the curious faces and whispered gossip. Her eyes locked on the man in chains. She couldn't see his face, but something about him felt still, like a well that ran deep under drought land. Dangerous maybe, but steady. "I'll take him," she said. The crowd quieted. "Come again?" the judge asked, leaning forward as if he hadn't heard her right. Joanna stepped closer. "The one in chains, I'll take him." There was a silence then, not the kind born of confusion, but the kind that curled into your gut and stayed there. Mothers hushed their children. Men stopped shifting. Even the wind seemed to pause. "You sure?" the judge asked, softer now. "Yes." The man in question raised his head. Slowly. His eyes met hers for the first time, and what she saw in them wasn't fear or hope or anger, it was absence. The look of someone who'd buried too much to dig anything back up. And yet something flickered beneath that stare. Not quite a plea, not quite defiance. Joanna turned to the judge. "I'd like to speak to him, alone." The judge frowned but nodded. "You've got 5 minutes, behind the tent." The man was led down with the clank of iron on wood. A deputy followed behind them but kept his distance. Joanna stepped into the shade of the tent, heart pounding so hard she thought it might betray her before she spoke. When they were alone, the man leaned against the post, arms still bound, eyes scanning her face like she was a riddle he wasn't sure he wanted to solve. "I'm Joanna Bell," she said. He said nothing. "They tell me your name." He hesitated, then Weston. Just that, one name, like a scar he wasn't proud of but couldn't remove. "They say you're a criminal." He looked away. "They say a lot of things." "Did you do it?" A pause. "No." Silence again. "I need help," she said finally. "My land's dying. I've got 2 boys under 10 and no strong hands left to work the fence lines. No one to drive cattle, chop wood. No man willing to step into what my husband left behind." His jaw twitched. "They think I picked you to prove something. They think I'm either mad or desperate." She stepped closer. "Maybe I am. But I looked at the other 2 and I saw boys who'd run the first time a storm came. I saw a man with nothing left to lose." He still didn't speak, but he didn't turn away either. "I don't need saving," she said. "I need someone who won't quit. If that's not you, I'll walk back out there and pick one of the others." Weston lifted his head. "If you pick me," he said slowly, "I work, I earn, but I go free." Joanna met his eyes, agreed. That was all. No handshake, no vow, just an understanding between two people who had nothing and yet still something to bargain. 5 minutes later, the judge announced it. The crowd gasped. One of the other suitors cursed under his breath, but no one said a word louder than that. The deputy unlocked Weston's chains. Joanna stood beside him, back straight, chin high. "May God bless your union," the judge muttered, more unsure now than amused. They didn't hold hands. They didn't smile. But when Weston climbed into the back of her wagon and Joanna took the reins, the dust behind them swallowed the town's whispers whole. They rode in silence for miles. Weston didn't ask questions. Joanna didn't offer answers. When dusk came, they reached the edge of her land. A tired fence, a weary barn, a house that had seen better days and maybe worse ones too. Two boys ran out to meet her, their faces smeared with dirt and their eyes wide at the sight of the stranger beside her. "This is Mr. Weston," she told them. "He's going to help us." The older boy, Samuel, stared hard. The younger Amos clung to her skirt. "He's strong," she said gently, "and kind." Weston looked away. That night she gave him the loft above the barn, said it was warmer than it looked. He didn't complain, didn't say much of anything at all, just nodded, set down his few things, none, really, and watched her walk away beneath the dying pink of the sky. But sleep didn't come easy. Weston sat on the edge of the cot, hands resting on his knees, eyes locked on the moon spilling through the slats. Somewhere in the night he heard the cry of a hawk, or maybe it was something else. He touched the edge of the manacle scar on his wrist. Far below in the house, Joanna lay awake too, listening, wondering, praying she hadn't made the biggest mistake of her life. But sometimes the mistake is the very thing God uses to break ground for something new. She just didn't know yet what she'd planted. The first morning was quiet, not the kind of quiet that comes with peace, but the kind that hums just beneath the skin, like a question waiting to be asked. Joanna moved through the house before the rooster even thought to crow, feet silent on worn floorboards, hands already in motion. Coffee boiled in the tin pot above the stove, steam rising into the rafters. She glanced through the frostbitten window toward the barn, unsure if she hoped to see Weston awake or not. He was. By the time she stepped onto the porch, mug in hand, he was already splitting wood. Shirt sleeves rolled, back steady, swing clean. There was a rhythm to it, not angry or rushed, just consistent, reliable. She watched him for a moment, the way his muscles moved under sun-faded cotton, the precision of each strike. He hadn't spoken a word since arriving, not at supper, not when she'd shown him where to find the feed or where the well was. He simply listened, nodded, and did. "Coffee's hot," she called out. He didn't look up, but he stopped swinging, leaned the axe against the stump, and walked toward her. She handed him the mug without a word. He took it, fingers brushing hers, and nodded once. Joanna turned back toward the house, unsure why her chest felt tight. Samuel was already feeding the chickens. The boy was 9, going on 30, shoulders tense from the weight of things he hadn't chosen. Amos trailed behind, still half asleep, clutching a wooden horse his father had carved the winter before he died. Joanna tried not to think of him. She focused on Weston instead. By noon, the fence line was half mended. Joanna worked beside him, sweat sticking the back of her dress to her spine, fingers raw from twisted wire. He worked like he was trying to burn something out of himself. Every post, every nail, every knot of rope was exact, fastened like it had to hold up more than wood. "You used to do this?" she asked, mostly to fill the silence. He didn't pause, once. She waited, nothing more came. "My husband was good with fences," she offered. "Better than me anyway." Still nothing. She chewed the inside of her cheek. "What about you, wife?" His hammer stilled. "No." That was it, one word, dry as dust. They worked until sundown. That night Weston ate with them, sat at the table with his shoulders straight and hands clean. He didn't speak, but he listened. Amos asked 100 questions. Why were his wrists red? What was the biggest animal he'd ever seen? Did he know how to shoot? Did he like dogs? Samuel said little, but his eyes never left Weston, watching, judging, protective in the way only a boy forced into manhood too early can be. Joanna noticed, but said nothing. Later, after the boys had been tucked into bed and the fire had burned low, Weston stood by the door. Not asking permission, not waiting for invitation, just waiting, as if unsure whether to leave or stay. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for today." He gave a single nod, eyes unreadable. "You sleep all right up there?" "It's warm enough." She hesitated, then stepped forward. "You don't have to stay." His brow twitched. "I meant here with us. I made a choice in town. I won't hold you to it. If you want to leave, I won't stop you." Weston stared at her for a long moment. "I gave my word." Joanna studied him. "That means something to you still." A muscle worked in his jaw, only thing that ever did. He stepped out into the night then, boots crunching the cold dirt, and vanished toward the barn without another word. Days passed. Then a week. And still Weston said little, but his presence settled into the house like a heavy coat, unspoken but known, always there. He repaired the porch, patched the roof, dug a new line for the well pipe. Samuel began shadowing him more openly, mimicking the way he held tools, the way he walked. Weston didn't encourage it, but he didn't chase the boy off either. Amos was bolder. He brought Weston wildflowers, stones he found near the creek. One of the baby chicks he decided was his favorite. Weston accepted each gift with the same quiet nod. Joanna noticed the change. The barn didn't creak at night. The dogs didn't bark like they used to. The boys laughed more, ate more, slept deeper. But not everything was still. Trouble arrived on the back of a black mare, carrying a man whose smile was too wide and boots too clean for the dirt of Bell Land. He rode up mid-morning, while Weston was out back chopping the remains of a dead tree for firewood. Joanna stood on the porch, drying her hands on a cloth when the man dismounted. "Mrs. Bell," he greeted, tipping his hat. "Pleasure." She frowned. "Do I know you?" "Not yet. Name S. Gentry, Travis Gentry, banker out of Thornfield." He gestured toward the hills. "Was passing through. Heard you made an unorthodox choice recently." Joanna stiffened. "Is that your business?" "Everything in this town's my business, ma'am. Money runs through me one way or another." He smiled again, wide and snake-like. "Just wanted to see what kind of woman chooses a convict over a gentleman." "I didn't choose a gentleman," she said evenly. "I chose a worker." He whistled low. "Well, I'll be, you've got grit, I like that." He stepped closer, boots tapping on the porch boards. "But grit don't pay debts, Mrs. Bell, and last I checked you were behind on your note." "I paid last month." He grinned. "Yes, you did, but there's another coming soon, and unless that man in your barn's chopping gold out of trees, I reckon you'll be late again." Joanna folded her arms. "We'll manage." Gentry leaned in, voice dropping. "You make one more payment, you keep your land, miss one, and I own it. That's simple." She didn't flinch. "Then I'll make it." Gentry chuckled, stepping back. "Don't get me wrong, I'm rooting for you. Always been a sucker for lost causes." He touched the brim of his hat. "Good day, ma'am." He rode off, dust curling in his wake. Joanna stood still for a long moment. She didn't notice Weston had stopped chopping wood until she turned. He was leaning on the axe, eyes locked on the empty trail, jaw set. "He comes back?" he asked. She nodded. "Let me talk to him next time." Joanna hesitated. "I don't want trouble." "Neither do I." They said nothing more. That night Amos brought Weston a drawing, a crooked house with stick figures and one very tall man beside a shorter woman and two children. "That's you," Amos said proudly, pointing to the tall one. "You're bigger than the house." Weston stared at the paper for a long time, then folded it and tucked it into his pocket. The barn was colder than usual that night. Snow had started again, soft but steady. Weston didn't sleep. He sat upright, staring at the slats, listening to the wind. His hand touched the drawing again. Then he stood. Walked outside. Past the fence, past the tree line. And into the dark. When morning came, he hadn't returned. Joanna waded through breakfast, through chores, through the noon hour. By late afternoon she saddled the mule and rode into the woods, heart pounding harder with every step. Her thoughts spiraled. Had he left? Was she wrong to trust him? Did Gentry get to him? She found him kneeling by a grave. Not her husband's grave, not anyone she knew. Just a marker, weathered, no name. Weston didn't look up when she approached. You buried someone here, she asked quietly. He nodded. Who? My brother. Joanna dismounted. What happened? War happened, and after it worse things. She waited. I left him behind once, thought I'd come back, never did, not until it was too late. Joanna said nothing. She just stood beside him in the cold. You ever lose someone and think maybe it was your fault? He asked. Yes. They didn't speak after that. They rode back as the snow thickened, two shadows moving slow beneath the gray sky. But something had changed. Not in the land. Not in the debt. But in them. The snow came harder that night. It didn't howl or whip, just fell with quiet persistence, blanketing the land in a soft and deceptive stillness. The sort of quiet that fooled men into thinking the world had finally calmed, only for it to bury them if they stayed still too long. Inside the house, the fire popped and cracked low in the hearth. Joanna sat by it with a worn blanket draped across her lap, needle in hand, mending a tear in Samuel's coat. Her fingers moved from habit, the motions ingrained from a dozen winters before this one. Across from her, Samuel pretended to read, eyes drifting from the book to the window every few seconds, as if expecting the storm to drag Weston away again. He'll be back in the barn, Joanna said softly, not looking up. He always is. Samuel didn't answer. He just turned the page without reading it. Amos had already fallen asleep curled near the hearth, one small hand gripping the tail of his blanket like a tether to some dream he couldn't afford to lose. Joanna tried to focus on her stitching, but her thoughts wandered. To Weston. To the grave. To what little he'd said. He'd never spoken of his past before that, never offered stories, names, places, just silence and labor, and the occasional glance that held more weight than his words ever did. But yesterday, by that nameless cross, she'd seen something shift. It wasn't confession, not quite, but it was close. Like a door cracking open in the farthest corner of an old cellar, letting in just enough light to see that something had been hiding down there all along. A gust rattled the window panes. Joanna stood, tucked the mended coat away, and checked the lock on the door. Outside, the barn glowed faintly through the snowfall. A single lantern swayed from a hook above the loft, its golden light blurred by the curtain of white falling between them. Weston hadn't gone far after the grave. He walked with her back through the trees in silence, stopping only once to carve a notch into the wooden marker, a fresh scar for an old wound. He hadn't explained it and she hadn't asked. Some things didn't need words. Some things spoke loud enough just by being. The next morning, the world was white and still. Drifts leaned hard against the fences, and the wind had carved ridges into the snow like frozen waves. The mule stood in the lean-to, half buried but breathing. Chickens huddled in the coop, silent and resentful. The air bit deep, sharper than any blade. Joanna woke early and lit the stove, coaxing the fire back to life with stiff fingers. The boys stirred slowly, drawn by the promise of heat and whatever food could be scraped together. They didn't have much: dried beans, the last of the salt pork, a few withered apples shriveled near the core, but it was enough to call breakfast. Weston came in with the dawn, boots wet, shoulders dusted in snow. He stamped off at the door, nodded to Joanna, then to the boys. "Barn's holding," he said simply. Samuel gave him a glance. "You slept out there all night." Weston nodded once. "Wasn't too cold." Another nod. "Cold enough." Samuel stared a moment longer, then he slid a tin mug across the table. "We got coffee." Weston hesitated, then took it. Joanna watched the exchange without a word. After breakfast, they got to work. Snow like this didn't wait for permission. It crushed fences, warped doors, soaked through every seam and board it could find. Weston and Samuel hauled wood, reinforced the barn walls, shoveled paths between the house, the coop, and the lean-to. Joanna patched blankets, dried clothes, checked the roofline. Amos followed her with a slop bucket and a wooden spoon, declaring himself general of chickens for the day. For a few hours, it was almost ordinary. Until the rider came. Again. Same horse, same clean boots, same grin. Travis Gentry dismounted at the fence line, dusting snow off his shoulders like he'd just stepped out of a parlor and not ridden 5 miles through a storm. Joanna met him on the porch, coat drawn tight, rifle leaning against the post beside her. "Well now," Gentry drawled, "isn't this a picture?" She didn't speak. "Just came to remind you, 5 days left on that note, whether don't change the math." "I said I'd pay." "I know you did," he smirked, "but I've seen how you're scraping. Bit of snow like this can ruin even the best laid plans." Joanna narrowed her eyes. "You don't get this land." "No, ma'am," he said, stepping closer, "but I might get something else." She stepped forward, blocking his view of the door. "What do you want, Gentry?" He grinned wider. "Just conversation, maybe supper next time I pass through." Before she could answer, the barn door creaked. Weston stepped out, shirt sleeves rolled, axe slung over one shoulder. He walked straight past them both, as if Gentry were nothing more than a shadow stretching across the snow. He didn't speak, didn't even glance in Gentry's direction, but his presence said everything. Gentry's grin faltered. "Friend of yours?" he asked Joanna. "My husband," she replied without blinking. The words settled heavy in the air. Gentry's smirk didn't return. He looked Weston up and down, then turned back to his horse. "Well," he said, "that clears things up." He mounted without another word and rode off, the snow swallowing his trail like he'd never been. Joanna turned to Weston. "I didn't mean to lie." He shrugged, didn't sound like one. But she felt the echo of the words long after he returned to the barn. "My husband." The truth of it hung there. Not legal, not spoken by preacher or inked on paper, but real all the same. He was here, he worked, he protected, and somehow in all the silence the emptiness they both carried had started to bleed into each other, not healing yet, but recognizing. That night Weston found the boys asleep in the parlor, curled together beneath the quilt Joanna's mother had made as a wedding gift 10 years before. He paused at the doorway, hand on the frame, something in his eyes too raw to name. Joanna noticed. "You okay?" He didn't answer right away. "They remind me of someone." "Your brother." He nodded. Joanna crossed the room and stood beside him. "What happened to your parents?" "Gone before I turned 15. Your brother raised you." "For a while." "And then?" Weston shook his head. "He tried. I made it hard." Joanna looked at him. "We all make it hard for someone." He met her eyes then, really met them. "They trust you," she said, "the boys." "I don't want to break that." "You haven't." He didn't reply, just looked at Amos's sleeping face. "I ain't never had someone small trust me," he said, voice almost too low to catch. "Not since." His voice trailed off. Joanna didn't press. Instead, she turned toward the fire, stoked it with a poker, and said softly, "Then don't run. That's all they need." Weston didn't answer, but he didn't leave either. And when the fire finally died down to soft orange coals, he was still standing there, watching the boys sleep like it meant something. 2 nights later, the quiet broke. It came in the dark. A scraping at the side of the barn, low voices, metal against wood, not loud but deliberate. Weston was already halfway to the door before the second sound came, a whisper of boots on snow, too soft to be Samuel, too heavy to be a stray dog. He grabbed the axe and moved toward the side entrance, slow and silent. Through the slats he saw them. 2 men, one with a crowbar, another holding a lantern low, both unfamiliar, both dressed too clean for travelers, too calm for thieves. They weren't there for food. They were here for something else. He stepped out before they saw him, axe raised. The man with the lantern jumped back. "Easy now," the one with the crowbar said. "We ain't looking for trouble." "You found it," Weston replied. The lantern tilted up just enough to reveal the face behind it, one Weston recognized. Gentry's man. "You're on private land," Weston said, voice low. "You're harboring debt," the man answered. "That makes things complicated." Weston stepped closer. "Leave." They didn't. Not until they saw the glint of the rifle barrel from the porch. Joanna stood there, barefoot in the snow, white nightgown blowing in the wind, rifle steady. "You heard him," she called. "Go." They left. But not quickly. Not like scared men. like wolves who'd sniffed the edge of a fence but hadn't given up the scent. The next morning, Weston built a stronger lock for the barn door. Joanna didn't ask him to. He did it anyway. The snow thawed slow. Day by day, the ice receded from the fence posts and the thatch. The creek behind the field broke loose from its winter grip, trickling first, then rushing like it had been holding its breath. Patches of brown earth emerged, soft and sun-hungry. The world was remembering spring, but the memory came with hesitation, like it had been burned once and didn't trust warmth anymore. Joanna moved with the season, one chore to the next, hands always busy. But in her chest, a coil of unease tightened more each day. The night the men came scratching at the barn hadn't left her, nor had the way Weston had stood between her and danger without hesitation. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't struck anyone, but there was a stillness in him that turned cold when threatened, like a pond gone suddenly deep. She watched him now from the kitchen window. He was working with Samuel, showing him how to tighten the yoke harness on the mule. The boy listened, his eyes sharp, movements eager. Every day since the storm, Samuel had drifted a little more from cautious silence into curiosity. Trust was forming, maybe not spoken, maybe not full, but growing. Amos sat on the steps carving a stick with Weston's old whittling knife, his tongue peeking out between his lips as he concentrated. Joanna turned back to the bread dough. She kneaded it hard, elbows flexing, shoulders tight. She didn't like Gentry's silence. The man had vanished after sending those 2 dogs to sniff around, and men like him didn't forget insult. They waited, calculated. That evening, after supper and dishes and quiet humming while Amos fell asleep, Joanna stepped out onto the porch. Weston was already there, sitting on the rail, sharpening a blade with long, slow strokes. The whetstone rasped in rhythm with the frogs croaking by the creek. She folded her arms. You think he's coming back? Weston didn't stop sharpening. Yeah. Joanna exhaled slowly. I don't know how to protect them. The boys. She nodded. He paused. You do it every day. I feed them, clothe them. But this land, it won't stretch, not far enough. And if Gentry takes it, then what? He didn't answer, just kept working the blade. You got any money stashed away? She asked, half smiling. Nope. Gold teeth. Just regular ones. Buried treasure. He finally glanced up. If I had treasure, I wouldn't have been in chains. Joanna sat beside him. What did you do? A long pause. Then he wiped the blade clean and set it down. Fought back, he said. Against who? Men like Gentry, different face, same boots. She looked at him sideways. You kill anyone. He didn't blink, no. But they thought you did. He nodded, didn't bother correcting them. Why not? Weston shrugged. Some debts are easier to carry than explain. She watched him a moment longer. I believe you, she said. He looked away then, like her words were too sharp to face head-on. 3 days passed. The weather stayed kind. The chickens laid steady. Amos caught a frog he swore was magic because it croaked every time he whispered the word butter. Even the mule seemed more cooperative. But the stillness never meant peace out here, only waiting. On the 4th morning, Samuel came running up from the creek, panting, face pale. Riders, he gasped. 4 of them, they got rifles. Joanna dropped the bucket in her hands. Where? Past the ridge, coming slow. Weston appeared at her side like smoke. Inside, he said to the boy, keep Amos close. Joanna's heart hammered. You think it's him? Weston didn't answer, just walked toward the barn. She followed. Inside, he pulled the rifle from its nail, checked the chamber. He didn't fumble, didn't rush, just calm movements born from a time when hesitation cost lives. We can't fight them, she said. No. So, we stall. Joanna bit her lip. Why would they come slow? To be seen, to scare. Well, she muttered, that part's working. They waited on the porch, rifles resting near the doorway, boots planted firm. When the riders came into view, she recognized Gentry right away, still smiling like he was already halfway to owning her chimney. He rode in front. Behind him were 3 men in long coats, wide hats, rifles slung across their backs, Hired help. The kind paid by the day and driven by the ounce. Gentry didn't dismount this time. Just leaned forward in his saddle, reins loose. "Morning, Mrs. Bell," he called. "Mr. Weston." "You can leave now," Joanna said. Gentry chuckled. "Ain't here to trespass, just making conversation. This land's not for sale." "No, I reckon it ain't, yet." Joanna stepped forward. "I made a payment." "You did," Gentry agreed. "But I never said you were late, just said you were close, and I'd hate to see you get caught off guard." Weston's voice was low. "You here to threaten a woman?" Gentry tilted his head. "You misunderstand. I admire her, truly. Stubbornness like that, rare. She just married wrong." Weston's jaw ticked. Joanna's voice sharpened. "You've said your piece." Gentry tipped his hat. "I'll be back in 3 days. If the next payment's ready, we'll be square. If not," he let the silence hang, "well, I'd hate for things to get uncivil." They turned and rode off, kicking up dust over the thawed mud. Joanna's legs felt weak as she stepped back inside. The boys peeked from the curtain, eyes wide. "I'll find the money," she whispered, more to herself than anyone. Weston stood still a moment, then turned toward the door. "Where are you going?" she asked. "Town." "What for?" He didn't answer. "Weston, I won't be long." He saddled the mule, took the rifle and the knife, and was gone before she could stop him. He rode hard. Down the old trail, past the edge of Bell Land, into the sparse woods and out the other side. The town wasn't far. Just 2 hours if you knew where the water cut shallow and the rocks didn't tilt your wheels. He arrived near dusk, tethered the mule by the old telegraph post, and walked straight into the saloon. It smelled like whiskey and stories that turned ugly after the second drink. Men looked up, some flinched, one stepped back. Weston ignored them all. He went to the bar, dropped a folded scrap of paper and said, "Need to see Ransom." The barkeep blinked. "You sure?" "I'm sure." The man vanished through the back. Weston waited, eyes on the mirror behind the bar. His reflection didn't move. 5 minutes later a man emerged, thick coat, gold tooth, scar down his left cheek like lightning. "Weston," he said slowly, "didn't reckon I'd see you again." "I need work." Ransom barked a laugh. "Ain't you supposed to be married now?" "I'm not here for jokes." The smile faded. "What kind of work?" "Clean, fast, pays in 2 days." Ransom leaned on the bar. "Why should I trust you?" "Because you owe me." Ransom stared at him. "That was 5 years ago." "And I never collected." Ransom swirled his drink. "There's a caravan, gold buyers, leaving Thornfield tomorrow. We were gonna leave them be, but plans change." Weston nodded. "I'm in." Ransom studied him a long moment. "You sure you want back in?" "No," Weston said, "but I got 3 days." That night he slept in the stable behind the saloon, not well. Not because of the cold, but because of the woman in white and the 2 boys with bright eyes. Because of the word she used. Husband. Not legal, not official. But maybe, just maybe, it meant more than either of them were willing to admit. And now, to keep that word from turning to dust, he'd have to walk back into the part of himself he thought he'd buried by that grave. The town of Thornfield was a day's ride north, but by caravan it stretched into 2. Gold buyers didn't rush. They rode with caution, guarded by hired guns and reputation, slow as freight trains through hills known for ambushes and thin law. Ransom's crew watched them from a ridge, 5 riders and 2 wagons, each reinforced with iron-strapped chests and grizzled guards who didn't smile. Weston lay on his stomach in the dust, binoculars steady in his hands. Behind him, Ransom crouched low, chewing a twig like it was a cigar and smirking through the stubble. "You sure about this?" Ransom muttered. "Ain't too late to turn back. Let some other man risk his hide." Weston didn't answer. His eyes never left the caravan. He'd only done this once before, years back in Texas, when desperation came fast and redemption came slower. He'd sworn off jobs like these, not because he lacked the stomach, but because somewhere deep in his soul he'd believed there might be something better. Someone better. A life earned honest. Joanna had made that feel real. but Gentry was coming. And the gold these wagons carried could buy the land, the house, the next 3 winters, and a clean name in a town that hadn't trusted his from the start. Ransom tapped the back of Weston's boot. They stopped near Dry Creek at dusk. That's where we hit. No blood if we're lucky. We make noise, get the gold, and ride. Weston stood slowly. What about the drivers? Ransom shrugged. Depends how loud they get. Weston's jaw clenched. Ransom grinned. This still the kind of job you don't believe in. Weston's voice came flat. Just don't like spilling what can't be put back. That night they moved through the trees like ghosts. The caravan had camped near the creek bend as predicted. Fires low, horses tied tight, guards taking shifts. Weston noted every step, every shadow, every rifle position. He slipped into the brush near the rear wagon, knife drawn only to cut the canvas straps. Ransom and the others fanned out, silent as snowfall, waiting for the signal. It came an owl's call, sharp and short. Then everything moved at once. One of Ransom's men let off a shot into the air, not to hit, just to rattle. The guards shouted, scrambling, rifles raised. Weston ducked low, pulling open the chest nearest him, stacks of bank bars wrapped in oiled cloth, heavy enough to stagger a man. He grabbed 2, stuffed them into his sack, then another. A guard lunged from behind the wagon. Weston turned, fist connecting with the man's jaw before he could fire. The guard fell hard, dazed. Weston hesitated only a second, then knelt and yanked the man's pistol away. Gunfire cracked on the other side of camp. A scream. Weston swore under his breath and sprinted through the brush. He found one of Ransom's men dragging a wounded guard, bleeding badly from a gut shot. "What are you doing?" Weston barked. "He pulled on me. What you want me to do? Hug him?" "Drop him," Weston growled. "Why?" "I said drop him." The man obeyed, startled by the fire in Weston's voice. "We're not killing for coin," Weston snapped. "Grab what you can and move, now." 15 minutes later, they were gone. No one dead but 2 guards wounded. One wagon emptied, the other untouched. They split the take at a shack near Devil's Fork. Weston took his share, 3 wrapped bars, enough to pay off every debt on Bell Land and still build a fence around the whole thing twice. Ransom clapped him on the shoulder. "Didn't think you still had it in you." "I don't," Weston muttered, wrapping the bars in an oilcloth. "You going back to her then?" Ransom asked, eyes sharp. Weston didn't reply. Ransom leaned against the beam. "You're walking into more than debt. You know that, right?" Weston turned. "What do you mean?" "That woman," Ransom said, "she ain't just trying to survive. She's building something. Something you might not be strong enough to carry." Weston's stare turned hard. "You don't know her." "No," Ransom said, "but I know you." They left it at that. Weston rode south at dawn. By the time he returned, Joanna was hauling water from the well, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hair pulled back tight. She looked up as he dismounted, sweat streaking her brow, eyes unreadable. "You were gone 2 days," she said. "I know. You didn't leave a note." "I didn't know what to say." She nodded once, turned back to the bucket. He reached into his saddlebag, pulled out the cloth-wrapped bars, and placed them gently on the porch rail. She stared at them, then at him. "What did you do?" "Something I swore I wouldn't." "Did you hurt anyone?" "No." She believed him, but she didn't smile. "We'll be square with Gentry now," Weston said. "I didn't ask you to do that." "No," he said, "but I did it anyway." She exhaled slowly, then picked up the bars and carried them inside. That night they sat at the table, the boys playing nearby, unaware of the gold in the pantry or the weight it carried. Joanna broke the silence. "Do you regret it?" Weston didn't answer immediately. Then, "I regret not having another choice." She studied him. "You do now." He met her eyes. "You ever think you were too broken for something better?" he asked. "All the time," she said softly. They sat in the flicker of firelight and something passed between them. Not forgiveness, not promise, but understanding. That whatever this was, it had been earned the hard way. The next morning, Gentry returned. Same smug smile, same polished boots. But this time, Joanna met him at the fence with Weston at her side. "We've got your payment," she said, handing over a leather pouch heavier than it looked. Gentry opened it, eyebrows rising at the weight. "Well," he muttered, "you surprise me." "Count it if you want," Weston said. Gentry hesitated, then closed the pouch and tucked it into his coat. "No need, I trust you." It was a lie, but he didn't want a scene. He mounted his horse, offered a final grin. "You keep surprising folks, Mrs. Bell. Maybe one day that'll stop working." Joanna said nothing, just turned and walked away. But Weston lingered. "You come back again," he said quietly. "You'd better come right." Gentry's smile faltered. "Is that a threat?" "No," Weston said. "It's advice." Gentry spurred his horse and rode off without another word. Weeks passed. The land softened. Crops started to take root. Weston taught Samuel how to till soil, how to run a straight line, how to listen to the earth. Amos built a chicken fortress out of fence scraps and named every one of them after parts of the Bible: Moses, Ruth, Abraham, Goliath. Goliath was the smallest. Joanna mended clothes and counted flour, smiled more, and sometimes, when she thought no one was watching, sang under her breath. The quiet between her and Weston grew less tense, less sharp. It turned into something else, something tentative, trust maybe, or the early shape of it. Then came the letter. It arrived by post, delivered by the same boy who brought news and catalogs once a month. Joanna opened it at the table, brows furrowing as she read. Her hands began to shake. Weston saw it. "What is it?" She passed the page to him. His eyes scanned the words, jaw tightening. "Her father. Sick. In Missouri. Asking for her." "I haven't heard from him in 5 years," she whispered. "Not since he told me marrying Caleb was a mistake." "You gonna go?" "I don't know." The letter ended with a plea. "Come see me. I was wrong, I'm sorry. I can't leave the boys. I can't leave the land." Weston stood. "I'll come with you." Joanna blinked. "What?" "You need to go," he said. "I'll come with the boys. We'll make it work." She stared at him, heart thudding. "You do that?" Weston didn't blink. "You're not alone anymore." The decision was made by morning. There wasn't much to pack, just what they could tie into 2 carpet bags and a feed sack. A loaf of bread, a tin of beans, a bundle of blankets, and Amos's wooden horse, which he tucked in like a baby before slipping it into the bag himself. Samuel loaded the wagon with quiet determination, checking the wheel latches twice, then 3 times. The boy hadn't said much since Joanna read the letter aloud, but his eyes hadn't left her since. He was watching for something, waiting for signs of change. Missouri wasn't close. 4 days if the trail stayed clear, 5 if it rained, longer if the mule gave trouble. Joanna stood on the porch, arms folded against the wind, her hat ribbon snapping behind her like a flag she wasn't ready to plant. "I haven't seen him in almost 6 years, she said. Weston stood beside her, tightening the cinch on the mule harness. "Long time." "He was hard, stubborn, thought marrying Caleb would ruin me." Weston didn't look up, did it? She smiled, faint and fleeting. "No, Caleb died too soon, but he gave me these boys. I'd never regret that." Weston nodded. "Then your father was wrong." Joanna's gaze swept across the land. Fence lines mended, coop standing strong, the barn roof patched and holding firm. For the first time in a long time, the place didn't look like it was clinging to life. It looked alive, and leaving it felt like tearing a page from a book mid-sentence. She turned to Weston. "You sure about this?" He met her eyes. "I'm not the kind of man who runs anymore." That was enough. By noon, they were on the trail. Samuel drove the wagon with his jaw set tight, mimicking Weston's posture. Joanna rode beside him on the mule, Amos bundled beside her, dozing against her back. The road to Missouri curved through red rock and shadowed valleys, winding into hills that still carried the last snow like bruises not yet healed. Weston rode flank, rifle across his saddle, eyes sharp, always scanning. They camped the first night near a dry wash hidden by cottonwoods. Joanna made a weak stew from dried meat and biscuit crumbs. The boys ate without complaint. Afterward, Weston carved by firelight the small shape of a sparrow emerging from a scrap of cedar. Amos watched, chin on knees, eyes wide. "Is that bird gonna fly?" he whispered. "Depends who holds it," Weston murmured. When the fire burned low, Joanna watched Weston walk the perimeter, silent, steps measured. She waited until he returned before speaking. "You ever think about going back?" He looked up to where? "Wherever you came from." He shook his head. "Ain't nothing there for me." "You sure?" "Places don't forgive, people might, but towns they remember." She studied him, and if someone tried. He didn't answer, just tossed another log on the fire. The second day passed slow. A wheel hit a rut. One of the bags came loose and spilled into the dirt. Samuel scraped his hand trying to catch it. Joanna cleaned the wound with water and quiet murmurs. Weston repacked the bag without a word. They passed a wagon headed the other way, a preacher and his wife pulling a Bible cart. He tipped his hat. She offered cookies wrapped in cloth. "Blessings on your journey," the woman said kindly. Joanna smiled but said nothing. Weston accepted the cookies with a nod, and they rode on. That night it rained. Not hard, not mean, just steady like it was trying to wash something away. The boys slept under the tarp, curled into each other. Joanna sat near the embers, her shawl soaked at the edges, eyes distant. Weston sat across from her, turning the wooden sparrow in his hands. "You think he's really dying?" he asked. She nodded. "I do." "And you want to forgive him?" "I want to try." Weston tossed the sparrow into her lap. "Then you're braver than me." Joanna stared at the carving, small, fragile, but whole. "You think forgiveness makes us weak," she said softly. "I think it makes us bleed." She met his eyes. "Sometimes bleeding's the only way to heal." He looked away. They didn't speak again until morning. The third day, they crossed a river. No bridge, just a rocky ford that hissed with current. The wagon nearly tipped halfway through. Joanna screamed. Samuel held the reins too tight, the mule balked, and for a terrifying second the wheels spun sideways. Then Weston was there. Boots in the water, shoulder to the wood, voice low and sharp. The mule calmed. The wagon steadied. They crossed. On the other side, Joanna grabbed his arm. "You could have been swept." "I wasn't," he said. "You didn't have to." "I did." They stared at each other, river behind them, trees dripping, wind pushing cold against their backs. Joanna let go of his arm. Weston turned and walked ahead. By dusk the hills flattened. Missouri lay just beyond the horizon. They reached the town at twilight, wheels creaking, horses blowing heavy. It was smaller than Joanna remembered. The general store leaned to the left, the church steeple crooked from some old storm. But the house still stood, her father's home, whitewashed with a red door and 2 rocking chairs out front. Joanna's hands trembled as she dismounted. "I'll stay here," Weston said. She nodded. She walked to the porch alone. The door opened before she could knock. He stood there. Older than she remembered, thinner, face lined like old bark, eyes sunken but alert. He leaned on the frame, breathing hard. "Joe," he rasped. "Papa." They stared at each other. He stepped back. She stepped in. The house smelled of dust and coal and something older, time maybe. She saw the same clock, the same Bible on the table, the same fraying rug she'd spilled soup on when she was 12. "I didn't think you'd come," he said. "I almost didn't." He coughed into a handkerchief. Red stained the cloth. Joanna looked down. "You said you were dying." "I am." "You want forgiveness now." He sat slowly. "I want to see my grandsons." She swallowed. "They're in the wagon with a man." His jaw twitched. "Their father." "No, a good man." He didn't ask more. She stepped outside, called for the boys. They ran up, nervous but eager. Amos stared at the house like it was a ghost. Samuel held back, eyes scanning everything. "This is your grandfather," Joanna said. The old man looked at them. "You favor your mother." Samuel didn't smile. Amos waved. The old man coughed again. Joanna turned to Weston. "Come in." He shook his head. "Not yet." Inside, the boys explored wide-eyed. Joanna sat by her father. They talked, not easily, not gently, but honestly. He told her about the fall, the sickness, the regrets. "I should have come after you," he said. "Should have seen what you built." She didn't cry. But when she kissed his forehead that night, her lips trembled. Weston sat on the porch, carving another bird. Joanna joined him hours later. "He's dying." "I know. He asked to see you." Weston stopped carving. "Why?" He said anyone who helped raise his grandsons deserved to be told thank you. Weston exhaled slow. "I ain't good at people," he said. "You're good with us." They sat in silence. The moon rose. The wind shifted. And somewhere inside that old house, the man who'd once told Joanna she was ruining her life now slept with a small boy curled beside him, clutching a worn Bible like a blanket. The world didn't heal in a moment. But something had started. And for the first time in a long time, Joanna felt the ache in her chest ease. Not because everything was fixed, but because she wasn't alone in carrying it anymore. They stayed 4 days. Joanna tended her father's bed, boiled herbs, wiped his brow with careful hands that still remembered how to soothe fevers. The boys settled in like they'd been there before, Amos chasing chickens in the backyard, Samuel helping fix a shutter that flapped in the wind. Weston kept to the porch mostly, carving in the afternoons and walking the fields at dusk. He didn't speak much to the old man, not until the last night. That evening the sky turned copper, heavy with an oncoming storm. The kind Missouri kept tucked beneath its ribs until it rolled out sudden and full of thunder. Joanna stood at the sink washing dishes in lukewarm water, eyes drifting toward the hills. Weston leaned against the porch rail, watching clouds stack like bruises. "You see that?" he asked. Joanna nodded. "It'll hit tonight." He looked toward the window where her father lay beneath a quilt, skin waxy, breathing shallow. "How long?" She swallowed. 2, maybe 3 days. The doctor came this morning. He nodded once. "He say it hurts." He said not yet. Weston looked down at the carving in his hands. A wolf this time, lean and watchful. He set it on the porch rail beside the others. One bird, one horse, now a wolf. "I don't know what I'm doing," Joanna whispered. "Yes, you do." "No," she said, voice breaking. "I'm just surviving." Weston turned. "That's what knowing looks like." She sank down on the step beside him, eyes glassy. He was cruel, Weston, not always, but enough. He knew it. "That doesn't make it right." "No," Weston said, "but it makes this matter." She looked at him. "You showed up," he said, "when most wouldn't. You didn't do it for him. You did it because you're the kind of woman who keeps her word, who lets people die with peace." Joanna looked away, tears slipping free. "I think God honors that," Weston added, voice low. Lightning flashed in the distance. Inside, the boys were curled near the fire, playing quiet games with pebbles and buttons. The old man stirred in his bed, coughing weakly. Joanna stood and went to him. Weston stayed on the porch. An hour passed before the door creaked again. It was the old man this time, barefoot, leaning heavy on the frame. He'd wrapped himself in the quilt, gaunt as bone, eyes too sharp for how sunken they looked. "You the one they talk about?" he rasped. Weston turned slowly. "What's that?" "The one who came in chains." Weston nodded once. The old man stepped forward, each step a labor. "You love her?" The question hung in the air. Weston didn't move. "I protect her." "That ain't what I asked." "I haven't earned the right to say." The old man smiled faintly. "Son, life don't wait for perfect men." Weston looked down. "I told her not to marry Caleb," the old man said. "Thought I knew what was best. Thought I had the right to speak like God." He leaned against the post, panting. "She proved me wrong twice now." Weston said nothing. "You see them boys," the old man continued. "They watch you like they're waiting for something to believe in." Weston met his eyes. "I don't want to fail them." "Then don't." It was that simple. The old man turned, gripping the frame. "You're a better man than you think." He shuffled back inside. And Weston sat with that truth until the rain came. The storm rolled in at midnight. Rain thudded on the tin roof, wind moaned through the eaves. Joanna barely slept, listening to her father breathe slow and ragged in the next room. Around 2, the breath hitched, then stopped. He died like he lived, stubborn, quiet, full of unfinished words. She sat by him until dawn. When Weston came in from the porch, he didn't speak, just knelt beside her and placed a calloused hand over hers. She didn't cry. Not then. The tears had come the night before, tucked into the silence between thunder and confession. The burial was plain. They laid him beneath the oak behind the church, the preacher saying words that meant more to the listeners than the man in the ground. Joanna stood between her sons, Weston behind her, hat in hand. The townsfolk watched from a distance, whispering, speculating. No one offered kindness. They rode out by sundown, dust trailing behind the wagon like a veil being pulled from something that had once been sacred. But back on Bell Land, the world had changed. The earth had warmed, trees budding with early green, fences held. The coop was intact, but something in Joanna had shifted. She walked slower, thought longer, listened more. One morning she found Weston fixing the window frame, shirt damp with sweat, hammer steady. "You ever think about staying?" she asked. He paused. "I'm here." "No, I mean, really staying." He set the hammer down. "What would that mean?" She stepped closer. "It means I stop pretending you're a hired hand." Weston turned. "And start pretending what?" "That you're family." He didn't speak. Joanna's voice softened. "I know what you've done. I know what you risked. And I know you think the past is still chasing you, but it doesn't get to decide who you are here." Weston looked at her, something raw flickering behind his eyes. "I'm not your husband," he said. "Not really." "You're more than that," she whispered. Silence stretched. Then Weston reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper. Joanna took it, opened it, read slowly. It was his pardon. Dated, signed, stamped. He watched her face. "I wired a man I used to know," he said. "After Missouri, asked him to dig. Turns out I was cleared 6 months ago. They just never told me." Joanna's breath caught. "I'm a free man." Tears sprang to her eyes. "Why didn't you say something?" "Didn't feel like it mattered, until now." She stepped forward. "Then say it now," she said. "Say what you want." Weston took a long breath. "I want to stay, not because I owe you, not because you need me, but because when I'm here I feel right." Joanna reached for his hand. "I never picked a husband in town," she said. "I picked one here." Weston's grip tightened. And for the first time he kissed her. Not fast, not desperate, but certain. That night Joanna sat by the fire, the boys asleep, Weston beside her. She looked at the carvings on the mantel, bird, horse, wolf. "What's next?" she asked. Weston smiled faintly. "Family." And he picked up the knife again. The wedding was nothing but quiet words beneath a cottonwood and 2 small boys standing solemn in their best shirts, Amos clutching a ring he didn't understand and Samuel trying to keep him from dropping it. The preacher said the words soft and slow, the wind carrying each vow into the trees like they were secrets too holy for men alone to hear. Joanna didn't wear white. She wore her mother's sky-blue church dress and pinned her hair with the same barrette she'd worn the day she buried Caleb. There was no music, no crowd, no feast afterward. Just 4 chairs, a pie, and a pitcher of cold water set out under the shade where the land rolled soft and forgiving for a while. Weston wore the same shirt he always did, fresh-washed, still threadbare in the elbows. His boots were clean, his hair combed back, but otherwise he looked just as he had the day Joanna pointed to him in chains and said, "That one." Only this time, his shoulders didn't slump. This time, his eyes met hers without flinching. After the vows, Samuel shook his hand like a man. Amos hugged his waist like a child. And Joanna, standing there with the wind in her hair and 2 sons beside her, smiled in a way Weston had never seen before. Not from her. Not from anyone. It wasn't joy, not quite. It was steadiness, like something that had finally settled into its rightful place. They didn't talk much about what came next. They just started living it. But spring turned quick into summer. Crops took root deep and wide, the earth feeding them like it remembered its purpose. Weston built a new coop. Joanna painted the porch. Samuel grew 2 inches and started bossing Amos like a deputy. Amos didn't listen, but he laughed more, loud and often. Weston took to waking before the sun. Sometimes Joanna would find him by the well, staring into the water like it held answers. Other times he was already working, sweat on his brow before the day began. But always, he came back inside before breakfast, sat at the table, and held the cup of coffee she poured him like it was something sacred. One evening a wagon approached. Joanna saw the dust trail first. Samuel spotted the shape behind it, a single rider with a canvas cover and a black trunk strapped in back. Weston stepped off the porch, eyes narrow. The rider waved. Ransom. He looked older somehow, not in his face but in the way he moved, slower, heavier. He dismounted like a man still unsure if he was welcome. Weston, he said, tipping his hat. Ma'am. Joanna nodded but said nothing. I heard, Ransom said, about Missouri and the letter and you. He motioned to the house. Didn't expect it, but I figured I'd see it for myself. You did, Weston said plainly. Ransom nodded, awkward now. I brought something. He unlatched the trunk, opened it slowly. Inside were tools, real ones, new handles, sharp blades, leather sheaths, a set that would cost half a man's season and last the rest of his life. Payment, Ransom said. For what? You scared, she asked. No, he said, not anymore. She looked at him. Even if they come back. I'll be here. She leaned against his shoulder. You're not in chains anymore. I know. But you still wear them sometimes, in your head. He didn't answer. She turned to him, eyes shining in the dark. You're not the man I pointed at, she whispered. You're the man I prayed for. Weston's voice caught. Joanna. You saved this family, she said. Not just from gentry, not just from hunger, but from emptiness. He looked down. She lifted his chin. I don't care what name they wrote on a paper. I know who you are. Wind stirred the cornfield beyond, rustling like applause. Inside, the boys were laughing. And Weston, for the first time since he stepped off that town platform in chains, smiled like a man who believed he might be worthy of what he had. But years later, people would ask about them. About the quiet rancher and the widow who picked him without reason. And folks would say all kinds of things. That it was desperation. That it was charity. That it was luck. But the truth was simpler. It was choice. She chose him when no one else would. And he chose her every day after. Not out of duty. Not out of debt. But out of love that was slow burning, hard-earned and stronger than the storm.